Romans chapter 11, verse 33 says, Oh, the depth of the riches and wisdom and knowledge of God. How unsearchable are his judgments, how inscrutable his ways. Proverbs 3 says, the Lord by wisdom founded the earth. By understanding he established the heavens. So we're talking about wisdom today. Hopefully you've gathered that. The wisdom of God, just wisdom in general. And according to dictionary.com, one definition of wisdom is having the power of discerning and judging properly as to what is true or right, possessing discernment, judgment, or discretion, right? You just kind of get it, right? You get it. That's wisdom. The root words in the Bible that are used, Hebrew and Greek, to use the word wisdom come from words that mean to see or to know, right? So you can look at a situation and you just kind of like you know what to do. Whether you've studied it, it's not necessarily book knowledge or IQ knowledge, right? You just know what to do. Oh, I see what's happening here. That's what wisdom is. You apply wisdom to God, and one theologian describes it as the attribute of God whereby he produces the best possible results by the best possible means. Let that one soak in. That's going to really be what I want you to take home with you today. That God's wisdom is he produces the best possible results. Whatever he has going on, the best possible results by the best possible means. So, like I said, it has nothing to do with IQ. It's not how you study for a test and how you score on a test. It is understanding how God designed life to work and then living your life in that way. God, the designer, has this master plan. You kind of get it. You read it. The more you know him, the more you study him, the more you get his word, and then you live that way. That is wisdom. Now, that helps you in everything. When it comes to how you handle your relationships with people, you have relationships with all kinds of different people in different settings. There is wisdom that comes with that through knowing God. How you do a parent, how you do marriage, how you handle people at work, your neighbors, how you handle single life. All those things involve wisdom. Wisdom can come from following God's plan. So when you're stuck in some area of life, and we all get stuck sometimes, right? And you're like, I don't know what to do about this situation. You always want to go to someone who has wisdom if you need outside help. And the best place to go is to someone who can see what's going on. Maybe your eyes are just too closed to the situation, so someone outside can see it better. Someone who just kind of knows maybe what to do, and look to them for advice. And you always go to someone who has an understanding of how God works. That's so key when you're looking for counsel in what you do with relationships, with business, with anything in life. Proverbs chapter 9, verse 10 says, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. The knowledge of the Holy One is insight. There are people who have advanced degrees, they're extremely intelligent people, and have advanced degrees in psychology and degrees in counseling that I would never send someone to help because they don't believe in God. So I mean, my first litmus test of a counselor, of finding help in whatever area of life is, do they believe in God? Do they have the same worldview where wisdom comes from? Because if they don't, then they've already shown that they're not wise, they're just intelligent. They will not be a counselor if they're not intelligent, all right? I'm not knocking them. I'm just saying if they don't have a healthy fear of God and understanding of God, they can't really help you, especially as a Christ follower. Excuse me. Now, when you add wisdom to some of the things we've already talked about in God, his sovereignty, his goodness, his holiness, what you have is a God who is able to see the whole picture, right? He can devise a plan that can accomplish anything he wants to accomplish by the most perfect means, right? He has the ability to devise perfect ends and achieve those by the most perfect means. God sees the beginning of a plan and the end of a plan, and all the little steps in between that you and we're living in the moment, and we don't know what's going on. His wisdom says, don't worry, I got a plan. I know what's going on here. I'm doing something. And that's where our trust comes in as followers of Christ. One person put it this way: God works in perfect wisdom for the highest good of the greatest number for the longest time. Wisdom. Think of Joseph in the Old Testament. Man, he went through some rough times. For years, one event after another in his life came up that were painful and that were awful, that had to be difficult to bear. And it would have been easy for him at any one of these moments to just throw his arms up and say, man, I give up, and just lay around and be sad and depressed. I mean, it would have been easy for any of us to be in any of those situations and just caved under it. And you wouldn't really blame him for that. But when you get to the end of the story, that's when you find out that all of these events, all these things that Joseph went through, that God allowed to happen, these hardships were used by God specifically to put Joseph in the place where he was literally the second highest ranking human being on the planet. Now, that was a pretty cool moment. It was the moments leading up that God used to devise and shift things around and moving with people that were awful for him. When you get to the end of the story, you see that God did some good things through it. So when Joseph was raised in an extremely dysfunctional family where his brothers literally hated him and wanted him dead, at any time he could have, day after day of arguing and fighting and bickering and all this stuff that happens with siblings, at any time he could say, God, why? Why am I in this family? Why do people hate me? Why can't I get along with my brothers? And God would, if he were in having a conversation with Joseph, would have just simply said, be patient, Joseph, I have a plan. I'm doing something here. And then that day when his brothers decided they would just go ahead and kill him, and they threw him in a pit and they were going to leave him for dead, and then they saw like a traveling caravan and thought, hey, maybe we just sell him. Might as well make some cash out of this thing. And they sell Joseph into slavery, and he becomes a slave in a foreign land in Egypt. That's a pretty rough day, right? At any point, he would have said, God, why? What did I do? What have I done that's so awful? Why am I a slave? Why am I in this foreign land? I don't even know their language. Why am I a slave? And God would have said, be patient. I got a plan. And somewhere in that process, when his master's wife came and seduced him a number of times and tried to get him to go to sleep with him, and he would have nothing to do with it. He ran off because of integrity. He didn't want to dishonor his master's wife. He didn't want to dishonor his God. And he runs away. He ends up in jail being accused of rape, something he didn't do. I mean, wouldn't there be a moment when he'd be like, God, why are you letting this happen to me? I mean, what did I do? I did the right thing. And here I'm in jail, right? And God would have said, don't worry, Joseph. Got a plan. Be patient. Be patient. God was able to see the beginning of the process before even Joseph was born. But we'll just go with Joseph's life. He knew what was going on, and he was able to see the end of the process of a whole entire nation being birthed in Egypt. It was God's plan, his perfect plan, and he maneuvered the pieces of Joseph's life to make something happen that God knew would work out for the good. A.W. Tozer puts it this way: not only could his acts not be better done, a better way to do them could not be imagined. If I was going to devise a plan how to take a guy who's in a dysfunctional family and say, hey, you're going to be the number 2 man on the world soon, I wouldn't have gone through the steps that God did. God's smarter than I am. He's wiser than I am. This trust, right? It's true for Joseph. It's also true for you and me and our lives as well. Now, sometimes it is difficult to see the wisdom of God in the midst of life, right? I mean, we're busy. We got schedules. Kids are running here and there. Things are happening in our lives. There's hardship. There's positive things. I mean, just life happens. And sometimes it's easy to forget the wisdom of God in our everyday moment of life. But God reveals himself to us in his wisdom in multiple ways. He reveals his wisdom through us through creation itself. Psalm 19:1 and 2 says, the heavens declare the glory of God. The sky above proclaims his handiwork. Day to day pours out speech, and night to night reveals knowledge. In the context of this chapter, he's talking about the wisdom of God, how creation just screams out the wisdom of God. Look at creation. It had to be someone with wisdom that created this. It didn't just mistakenly happen. It wasn't just an explosion and everything as we know it happened. It had to be something, some designer with wisdom behind the scenes. Psalm 104. It says, "O Lord, how manifold are your works. In wisdom have you made them all. The earth is full of your creatures." It's full of his wisdom and his created beings, and they all scream out to the wisdom of God. When our oldest daughter, Danielle, was in nursing college studying nursing, she would, everyone, it's pretty intense if you've ever been through that or know people who've done it. And because you're learning everything, you're learning this, all the whole human body and how it works, and so many things you never knew existed, you start learning. And every once in a while, she would come upstairs from her dungeon of study and explain to us like some new thing she was learning and explain the complexity of the human body. And we would just be amazed at the things that she was saying. It'd just be amazing. Look at the systems that are constantly working in our bodies, communicating to one another, working in sync, all these things happening just so that we're here today breathing and alive. I mean, one of those goes crazy and you're out. You're done. You've got the circular system. If that's not working, there's so many other things that are not happening. The lymphatic system, the respiratory system, the digestive system, all these systems that we have in our body, each one in itself is so complex and so amazing in how it works and how it knows how to work and when to work and how to do things and how it communicates with the other systems. And any breakdown, and you get in some pretty serious trouble. It screams of the wisdom of God. This couldn't have been happen chance. It couldn't have just mistakenly happened. It was lightning struck, and here we are, these complex organisms. I mean, something made this happen. A wise creator. But it's not just us. I mean, you look at the rest of creation, look any given animal and the systems that they have in their bodies, vegetation, and just how that whole process works, and how we breathe out stuff, and the plants breathe that in, they shoot it back out, the stuff we breathe. I mean, just this recycling that happens continually on the planet. The ecosystems that are there, the atmospheres, the gravitational pulls, and what that does to our planet, and the tides, and just so many things that happen, the moon, and the planets, and the stars, and the galaxies, and all the things out there. It is impossible for that not to have happened without some type of intelligent design of creation. How can you possibly look at that without being impressed with the wisdom of God? It just screams out the wisdom of God. You probably remember the story of Jesus one day walking down the street, and there's a field full of flowers, right? And he just kind of pauses and says, consider the lilies of the field. Just look at them. We have this great creator who created them, and they're gone here today and gone tomorrow. Then, they're just flowers. Don't you think that the one who created them cares that much more for you? Don't worry about what's going on in your life. I know it's easy for someone else to say, but you got big stuff going on. Don't you think God cares more about you than those flowers? That literally, it's fall. They're going to be burned up soon. They're just going to be gone if they're not already. He cares more about you, an eternal soul. Creation screams the wisdom of God. God also shows us wisdom through providence. This is just the working of God, Him orchestrating life events. Psalm 33:10 says, the Lord brings the counsel of the nations to nothing. Right? So he's working on a national level. He frustrates the plans of the peoples. People like you and I, we have plans. Sometimes he'll frustrate them. Sometimes he'll change them. He works on a local level. The counsel of the Lord stands forever. The plans of his heart to all generations. So there's God moving around nations, rising up leaders, bringing others down, working in our lives and the lives of people around us all the time. You can see it over and over again. You can see it in your life if you really sit back and think about it. I can certainly see it in my life. I look back and I think, man, in 4th grade, I wanted to be a preacher. I didn't know what that meant. I didn't know where I was going. I didn't know how that was going to look like. All I knew is I loved Jesus, and I wanted to tell people about Jesus, and I wanted to do it the rest of my life. So here I'm a 4th grader kind of making that decision. A couple of years later, mom and dad get divorced. Mom and the boys, us, we moved back to the Des Moines area because we moved up to Clear Lake for a few years with dad's job, but we came back down here, and while we're here, my brother meets a girl in high school. He starts dating her. Her dad's preacher and a church that introduced us to a certain fellowship of churches that also introduced us to a particular Bible college that these churches were connected with. Somewhere in there, Cheryl's dad gets a new job, and they're in Illinois, and they're going to either move to Chicago or Des Moines. And so as a family, they kind of figure out, obviously, they moved here, right? They moved to the Des Moines area, ended up moving to Ankeny. So Cheryl meets a girl who becomes her best friend in 5th grade, whose dad is a preacher of a church in Ankeny that happens to be part of this fellowship of churches as well. So here we are living separate lives, a couple years apart from each other, but young, being introduced to this fellowship of churches. When it comes time for me to go to college, I didn't care where I was going. I didn't know. I had no deep theological, like, I have to go this or that. I just love Jesus. I want to tell people about Jesus. I want to go to a place that just loves Jesus, right? And my brother happens to be going to this college that he was introduced to from his girlfriend and her dad. So he's going there, and they're doing this crazy promotion where incoming freshmen get a free semester of tuition. Sound good to anybody? Not only does the incoming freshman get a free semester, but so does the person who invites them if they're a student. So my brother says, hey, why don't you come to my college? And I'm like, okay, they love Jesus, right? Yep, okay, they met all my criteria. So I end up going there. Coincidentally, never heard of the place up until like a year or two prior to that. Well, in the meantime, Cheryl, who's involved in the church, is involved with this college, is part of the high school singing group, and they're traveling around all over the place during the summer, singing and doing concerts. And with that comes a nice little scholarship as well. So she's ready to graduate, and she decides, I got this free year of college. I should go to college, and then she's going to go to a real college and learn counseling. That was her plan. It didn't quite work that way because the summer before she came here, I'm in the college singing group, and we happened to show up in Ankeny one night, and we were doing a concert there. And the way this particular musical was, the choir held out in the background, and the music would start, and I'd come up front with my little microphone, and I'd say, "Oh, give thanks to the Lord." I was a little healthier voice back then, with a nice deep, "Oh, give thanks to the Lord, call on His name, make known His deeds among the nations." And she's thinking, "Oh, that guy has a really low voice." And so I'm kind of sticking out a little bit to her there. And then the choir comes and we sing, and we're singing along. And if you've ever been in a choir, you're supposed to keep your eyes on the director because he's, doing all this stuff. And like right over here, there was this girl, and I'm going like, ooh. And I'm like looking at him, and I look at her. And it happened to be this girl named Cheryl. I didn't know her name was Cheryl at the time, but after the concert, I found somehow happened to have equipment near her when we were loading the trailer up, so she volunteers to help. I'm like, well, here, you can help me, And we started a nice little conversation. Discover she's going to college, the same college I'm going to in just a few months. And so she shows up at college, which I've stalked her for a while by now, and I did not waste a lot of time asking her out, and pretty soon we're married. Now, that's some pretty vague story, but any one of those things could have changed, and we never would have met. You would have married some jerk from Chicago, right? Or I would have married some whatever from up north. But God just kind of brought us together, and He moved things around. I don't know. Is it God's big plan? I mean, He would have been okay if I married someone else, but He put us together in such a way that it's been a cool thing, And God's blessed that. He works in our lives. Think of the circumstances that have gotten you together with the people you know, or the place where you work, or the place where you live. God's working in the background all the time of our lives. We read this a couple weeks ago, Romans chapter 8. We know that for those who love God, all things work together for good. For those who are called according to His purpose. That's saying that God is working in the background, making things work out. I got a plan in your life. I got something I want you to do, so I'm making things kind of working out. Right? That's what He's doing. That is the providence of God and His hand moving in people's lives. Another area He that reveals His wisdom to us is through redemption. Through redemption. Listen to this portion of a letter that the Apostle Paul writes to a church in Corinth in 1 Corinthians 2. He says, "Yet among the mature we do impart wisdom, although it's not a wisdom of this age or the rulers of this age." Okay, the wisdom I'm teaching is not what, the professor at college is not going to be real impressed with this, right? So it's a different type of wisdom. They're doomed to pass away anyway, right? But verse 7, we impart a secret and hidden wisdom of God, which God decreed before the ages for our glory. None of the rulers of this age understand this, for if they had, they would not have crucified the Lord of glory. But as it is written, what no eye has seen, no ear heard, nor the heart of man imagined, what God has prepared for those who love him. These things God has revealed to us through the Spirit, for the Spirit searches everything, even the depths of God. Now what Paul is talking about here, the apostle, he is talking about the redemption story. That there was a plan that God had from the very beginning, that he had been orchestrating these events throughout the world history, leading to the birth, the death, and the resurrection of Jesus Christ. All of these things, even the story of Joseph we mentioned, is all a big part of the story of how Jesus came to be here in the world. Now, that $40 word redemption simply means to purchase back, right? You and I have sinned against God. At some point, we made a choice and we separated ourselves from God. And God's like, I want these people back. And because of his nature, for whatever reason, the only way to get us back was through the shedding of blood. That's why they had sacrifices of animals throughout all the Old Testament. That was all as well leading up to the ultimate sacrifice of Jesus on the cross, the ultimate redemption story. So all these centuries and centuries and centuries of God was him having a plan in place and orchestrating that plan to get to that perfect place, that goal. It was not a spur-of-the-moment thought when God was looking down at the planet thinking, man, things are really a mess. Jesus, why don't you go down there? Let's fix this. I mean, it has been planned for forever, developed through thousands of years, through multiple generations, multiple nations and kings and queens and characters, all described in the Old Testament. The whole Old Testament is that story of God working out the redemption story for mankind, the wisdom of God. It was fulfilled. It came to a conclusion. Well, there's more to come, but that plan, at the moment when Jesus gave up his spirit and said, it is finished, this plan we've had in place for centuries, I've just completed it. It's done. Y'all come back home. The wisdom of God. The wisdom of God. So how do we respond to this? What do? We understand God is wise. You're here. You're a person of faith. You're like, okay, I get that. God is wise. What do I do with that? What does that mean to me? Simple. 3 things here. Number 1, learn to live wisely. If God is wise, he wants us to be wise as well. God is holy, he wants us to be holy. And God is wise, he wants us to be wise. Ephesians 5 says, look carefully then how you walk, not as unwise, but as wise. He's talking to the church, he's talking to us. You're a follower of Jesus, a follower of him, he wants you to live wise, making the best of best use of the time, because the days are evil. Therefore, do not be foolish, but understand what the will of the Lord is. So to live wise is to live according to God's plan in such a way that your life reflects that you are trusting God. You're reading his word one thing and you trust him, that must be accurate because he wrote it. He wants me to live this way, so you live that way. The Bible tells us how to do everything. It tells us how to handle relationships. It tells us how to handle our marriages. It tells us how to handle our children. It tells us as children how to handle our parents. It tells us how to work with our co-workers. It tells us how to handle relationships everywhere. And wisdom is to read what that says and say, I'm going to do it that way. It doesn't make sense to me maybe sometimes. We sometimes think we're a little bit smarter, but when it's trusting, God probably knows this better than I do. God's timeless and he is ageless and he's the designer. He probably knows how to do this. I'm going to trust his words over mine. The Bible tells you how to handle your money. It tells you what kind of language to use. It tells you how to fulfill your purpose in life. I mean, just go right down the line. Everything, the Bible is filled with information for us to live by. Wisdom, us living wisely, is reading what God says and living by it. Sometimes people ask me, what kind of church are you? And I say, well, we're a Bible church. Well, what does that mean? It says, really, it's very simple. If God says do something, we figure we should probably do it. And if God says don't do something, we kind of figure, we probably shouldn't do that. That's generally my conversation with people. And they're like, well, yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. That's what wisdom is. It's living out God's word. Living wisely, trusting God, knowing he knows better. A second response is to fear God. Fear God. The fear of the Lord, we read this earlier, is the beginning of wisdom, and the knowledge of the Holy One is insight. I don't know. Do you think maybe in America we've somewhat lost the fear of God? In the church. I'm not even talking about America. I'm talking about the church. We've kind of lost the fear of God. There's no trembling. He's all lovey-dovey and the happy side, but there's no like, well, he's God. There's no like, he knows how to do life more than I do. It's more like, this is how I want to do life, and I'll just take the pieces of God that I like. It's kind of a salad bar type approach to God, as opposed to, you're God, and I'll change accordingly. See, when I was growing up, do you know what kept me from like breaking every law known to man? and at least the laws of our family? Dad. The fear of Dad. He had a razor strap inside our pantry, nailed to a wall. I knew exactly where it was, and all he had to do was mention it, or all I had to do was remember he had that, and that altered my behavior a lot. Do you know what I'm talking about? It was a fear. It was a healthy fear. I mean, I wasn't like scared. Not like I couldn't talk to him, but it was there's certain lines you don't pass. You don't cross this line because it's, a fear. Later on in life, what kept me from being really rebellious was a fear of really disappointing my mom. Now, it didn't take me long to get bigger than her. Those of you who remember my mom, it's not like she could physically intimidate me. She could take the razor strap and I'd be like, give me your best shot, really. That didn't scare me. But I had this fear of dishonoring her. That kept me in line. See, when I read the Bible, or you read the Bible, and it says one thing, but our flesh is screaming to do something else. It's the fear of God that says, I'm going to go God's way. Now, I'd like to say we're all prim and proper. Oh, no, I'm a holy person. It's like, you know what? I want to go to heaven. I don't want to go to hell. Anybody here think hell's cool? Doesn't that kind of keep you going at times? Has there ever been times you thought, I'd like to? No. Eternal damnation and flames, that doesn't sound good. Weeping and gnashing of teeth? No, not for me. I mean, it's a healthy fear of God. Or I'll think of stories of like Ananias and Sapphira, who all they did was simply misrepresented the church. How much of a gift from the sale of their house that they gave. And God knocked them down dead in front of everybody, one at a time. And the scripture after that says the great fear spread throughout the land. They're like, yeah, don't lie about, don't go to church and lie. Just don't lie. Why? Or you might die. I mean, that's fear, right? I mean, that's a healthy fear. It's not a scared to wake up like he's going to strike you with lightning, but just knowing my actions have consequences. Well, the fear of God is the beginning of wisdom. And then you go, now that you know that, you're like, okay, now I need to know. Now I need to know what is his expectations. And you start getting into the Word and studying. That's when you start living wisely. One last thing. What you do with this wisdom, you ask for it. You need wisdom? Ask for it. That's what James says. If any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask God, who gives what? Generously to all, everybody, right? Without reproach, and it will be given him. God will give you wisdom 100% of the time that you ask. I don't know about you, I need that a lot. I can't tell you how many times I've prayed, God, I don't know what to do here. I don't know what to do. I need your wisdom. And somehow, some way, he communicates, we'll do it this way. And I'm like, okay. So you're in a dating situation, you're not sure what to do, how to act. God, I don't know what to do here. He'll tell you. You're in a married situation, you don't know how to act, what to do. He'll tell you. You're in a job, do I go this job or that job? Do I go to Chicago or do I go to Des Moines? God, I don't know. What do you think? I'll do whatever you ask. You ask, and he gives you wisdom. And when you receive that wisdom, and sometimes, honestly, it's no more than a gut feeling for me. I'm like, I think this is the way to go. You go with it. Especially if it's based in God's Word. You just trust. Let God worry about the consequences. Let God worry about what happens next. He's got some plan. I may not see it, may not get it. I might not know it till the end. I may never know it. Think of all the prophets who never knew. They never got to see Jesus. They were just part of a puzzle God was putting together. And then later on, Jesus came. So I don't have to know. I just follow. Follow. Trust God, knowing He is wise, knowing He is going to work toward the best possible ends in your life by the best possible means. That's what you do with the wisdom of God. Let's pray. Father,